officially open today's program, it is my pleasure to invite our Center Director, Dr. Mahalea V. Ravago, for her welcome remarks. Ma'am.
Good afternoon, everyone here in the room, and ni hao ma, okay, to the master class of Professor Chip, who composed of students from the Education University of Hong Kong and Shanghai Jiao Tong University. They are joining us via Zoom, and this is also the first time we're using this translator, and it's timely because of our topic. And according to our speaker, the translation is actually really good, right? And I think also tuning with us online are teachers from SUCs because the notice for the seminar has been circulated by no less than Cher groupies among the SUCs. And of course, I'd also like to greet our INNOTECH staff here, and thanks to the Knowledge Management for efficiently organizing, as always, our seminar, led of course by Chris here, the manager for KM. And of course, we are delighted and grateful to welcome everyone to the, as we've said earlier, 6th installment of the INNOTECH Seminar Series on Education, Innovation, and Technology. This is a space we've created to spark meaningful dialogue on the future of learning in our region. I warmly welcome you to today's seminar series featuring Dr. Lim Cher. We are privileged to learn from him as he shares his insights on rethinking GenAI competencies for university teachers. At INNOTECH, we are committed to being a catalyst of innovation and technology, transforming education in Southeast Asia. Guided by our vision that by 2035, we will be a leading force in shaping learners into the change makers of tomorrow, we strive to ensure that every initiative we undertake prepares schools and learners for the demands of an AI-driven world. The urgency of this work is underscored by compelling evidence. I always say this, artificial intelligence is projected to contribute nearly $1 trillion to Southeast Asia's GDP by 2030. That is about 10 to 18% increase in the national economies. Yet, despite this promise, most countries in the region remain in the early stages of developing education-specific AI policies. This gap makes the conversation we are having this afternoon both timely and critical. Professor Lim's reflection on Gen AI competencies for teachers aligns strongly with INNOTECH's ongoing initiative to develop a regional policy framework on AI in education. His expertise in supporting teachers to effectively and responsibly engage with generative AI reinforces our commitment to building education systems that are adaptive, inclusive, and ethically grounded. In advancing this agenda, INNOTECH is working in close coordination with the ministries of education across Southeast Asia, SEAMEO centers under the education clusters, and other like-minded institutions. INNOTECH is also supporting the Philippine Department of Education toward an ASEAN Leaders Declaration on policy on AI in education as the Philippines hosts the ASEAN Summit in 2026. We are fostering broad-based endorsement among ASEAN heads of states and education ministries to facilitate sustained resourcing, coherent national implementation, and practical cross-border cooperation. Through these partnerships and the commitment they reflect, we aim to shape a regional policy framework on AI in education that is regionally grounded, globally informed, and future-ready, while progressively strengthening the AI competencies and ethical foundations of learners, teachers, and the wider workforce in support of the digital economy and Southeast Asia's deeper economic integration. Thank you once again for joining us today. Let us approach today's dialogue with openness and purpose. Together, as I always say, let us drive innovation for education.
Without much further ado, ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Dr. Lim Cher.
Okay, hi, very good afternoon. Thank you to the Center Director for inviting me to actually to be talking in this particular seminar series. It's not my first time in INNOTECH for sure. I think my association with INNOTECH have been since I think in the early 2000s, right, when I was in my very early 30s. So you know how old I am now. Quite sad, but yeah. Okay. I think it is actually quite appropriate that I am working with INNOTECH in this particular series. If you take a look at my title, Chair Professor of Learning Technologies and Innovation, I think from that title you could see you have got the technologies there and you have got the innovation there, and therefore INNOTECH, right? So the association with INNOTECH is always there, right? And we just came out with a Global Institute for Emerging Technologies. And the way that my institute actually define emerging technologies, it's not just what is latest in technologies in terms of Gen AI or VR, AR, etc., right? But it's also the innovative use of technologies, could be assisting technologies, could be radio technologies, could be SMS, etc., right, in addressing the education issues in an innovative way, right? So if you look at emerging technologies, I think the focus is not on the technologies itself. Okay, so I'm from the Education University of Hong Kong. So it would be quite the same as Philippines Normal University, like PNU, right? PNU, right? So it started with a lot of teachers' colleges, right? And then it came together as the Hong Kong Institute of Education in the late 1990s, right? And it's a very young university. It just got the university title in 2016, right? So just about 10 years ago, right? But it have always had postgraduate studies as well as undergraduate studies since it was a Hong Kong Institute of Education, right? So most people tend to actually introduce me as chirping from the University of Hong Kong, but I'm not from the University of Hong Kong. The director had been to my university, which is in the countryside of Hong Kong. Lovely place, so if you have got a chance, do come, right? It is at least about 45 minutes drive from the island to my university, right? Surrounded by mountains and sea. Beautiful place. So if you got a chance. So it's the Education University of Hong Kong. I'm going to be sharing with you, okay, let's try if this works. I think this got to work. Do I point here? Okay, right. I'm going to be just sharing with you one of the key projects that we are working on right now, right, which is GenAI Competencies of University Teachers, right? And this project is actually in collaboration with the Shanghai Jiao Tong University. I've told the director that we work with them because my university is very much in terms of humanities and social sciences, right? But Shanghai Jiao Tong is more of engineering and science with computer science as well, right? So we want to be able to look at Gen AI use in university teaching in all discipline areas. And at the same time, as part of the project, we want to develop an app that is going to be used for professional development of university teachers. That is Gen AI enabled. Okay, so when you take a look at Gen AI, I think the idea of AI in education is nothing too new, right? If you take a look at intelligent tutoring system, it has been around for the last 20 years. If you look at diagnostic testing system, it has also been around for the last 20 years, right? In 2017-18, there was a big report by McKinsey Consulting, right? They said that more than 800 million jobs all around the world is going to be taken over by AI. That was 2017, 2018. way before ChatGPT came on, right? So what happened when ChatGPT came on? It came in right after the pandemic, when borders were open, 2022, right? November 2022, to be exact. So November 2022 was the first time that I could bring my whole family out of Hong Kong without being quarantined, right? So we went to South Korea to ski. It's fun, right? You know, it's like first time going to a snowy place to ski. So we went to ski. After skiing, because I've got 2 daughters and 1 wife. No. Because you might think that everything come into, I've got 2 dogs though. I've got 2 dogs, 2 daughters and 1 wife, okay? So 2 daughters. So when you have teenage daughters and 1 wife, after skiing for 1 week, they would want to go shopping. Yeah, true. I mean, it cuts across all nationalities and all ethnic groups, right? So they want to go shopping. I'm a guy, right? And what do I do when they shop for cosmetic, which the South Korean is known for, right? Fashion and cosmetic. I'm not interested in that. So I called all my good friends in South Korea who are professor working in the development banks and said, oh, let's go for lunch. Then I told my wife, oh, I got a lunch meeting, right, with 2 professors and 1 officer from the World Bank and a director from the Asian Development Bank. Yeah, so they all came to my hotel. I do not need to go shopping. Fantastic, right? Do not record this. Cut the recording, right? Right. So at that time, we still can't get ChatGPT in Hong Kong yet, but you can get it in South Korea. So there was a bunch of us. We were all EdTech specialists, right? I think among us, we've got more than 100 years of experiences working in EdTech, right? And then the director of ADB asked, why do EdTech always fail in school, right? Very legitimate question, right? Why do EdTech always fail in school? Not just in the Philippines, not just in South Korea, not just in Singapore, which is where I'm from, not just in Hong Kong, right? But why do it always fail in school? So of course we come up with a lot of things, right? Infrastructure, all right? Infrastructure, hardware, access. We came up with teacher professional development or lack of, right? Teachers' mindset, high-stake examinations, the focus on the exam. So we came up with like at least 20 different reasons why EdTech failed. And we came up with a lot of case studies and stories as well, right? Because we are like professors, right? Like, we know everything, you know, right? So what my friend from the ADB did after lunch, he went to ChatGPT after lunch and he asked the same question. And he generated the responses and shared it among the 5 of us. And the responses were 95% similar, right? And then I started asking myself, when the McKinsey report came out in 2017-18, I was thinking that they would refer to low-skilled worker, low-skilled, middle-skilled workers, right? That they will be replaced in terms of more labor-intensive type of operations, more automated type of the operations. But I didn't know that when ChatGPT comes out, my job would be at stake. So what then is my relevance as a professor? So I did a lot of thinking, right? And I started to observe how students learn, right, with ChatGPT. Of course, after ChatGPT, there are many other Gen AI apps that came out, right? I think the latest hot was probably DeepSeek from China, which was able to do it at a much lower cost, right? So what I'm going to share with you is first, why we in the university need to rethink about Gen AI and how it is used for teaching and learning, right? that it is no longer the university teachers or professors that bring in the technologies and expect the students to use it. Because with Gen AI, regardless of whether you introduce it or not, students are going to use it, right? So I would actually use that as the starting point, right? And then after that, I would like move on to talk about why is there a need to talk about Gen AI competencies for teachers, right? There's a need to talk about it for us in education because if we don't talk about competencies, how do you know what type of professional development and professional support to provide for university teachers, right? Without that competencies, without that standards, right? Like how do you know what is relevant and what is not, right? But we know that there are a lot of competency standards and competency frameworks around, right? I think the most common one is by UNESCO, right? That came out with a AI competency framework like earlier this year, right? For students and for teachers, right? So we are not trying to discount these frameworks. We are saying that maybe with our framework, you can rethink about your own framework as well. Or our framework can not replace, we do not intend to replace any framework. Our framework could complement, right, existing frameworks that you have. Then I will share with you the actual framework, and then I'll talk about some of the plans like that we have, right, doing consultation with countries from Latin America right through to Asia to get a better sense of whether what we are doing is something that is relevant to all countries. And also, we want to be documenting case studies. Of course, in this project, we are only documenting case studies in my university and in Shanghai, right? But I would say that eventually, when we find more partners, we would like to be documenting some of these practices in other universities as well, right? And then I would talk about how then are we going to be building a Gen AI-enabled PD app for teachers, right? For university teachers. So we would be actually starting the development next week when my team would be going down to Shanghai to actually talk to the developer, right? Okay, the shift. I think this is like probably what we need to be quite aware of. If we just start by like looking at the second point, right? When you are looking at Gen AI, I think you have got to keep in mind that it's not just about being student-centered. It's actually about being student-driven, right? Because as I said, regardless of whether you would want to have Gen AI within your class, students are going to use it regardless, right? But of course, we cannot assume that all students are the same. So even if students have access, even if they have access to Gen AI, they might not have the competencies to use Gen AI. So once there's access and certain students cannot use Gen AI, it means that there is lack of inclusiveness, right? That means some students will be included in this transformative process, some students would not, because we cannot assume that all students are the same, right? Do they have an inquiry mindset? Do they know how to set parameters? Those are the questions that we would actually like constantly ask, right? And then when you start to look at the first point and the last point, right? The first point is more of micro, right? Whereby the whole knowledge construction process is a dialogue, right? So for those of you who have been using ChatGPT on a regular basis, you know that it is not just one correct answer. It's always a dialogue, right? And you would always be validating the responses as well by asking different types of questions, right? So the whole knowledge construction process is more of a conversation, right? So For those of you who have been teachers before or are teachers, you would probably heard of like constructivism and social constructivism, right? So when we are actually looking at Gen AI, it's really social constructivism in practice, right? And that social is not just because ChatGPT is based on a large language model, right? The conversation is not technically with the technologies, it's with knowledge that is spread all over the world. So that conversation is not just a conversation between technology and the student, right? It is technology within the broader, so-called the broader spectrum of knowledge that is being spread basically all over the world, right? Okay, so we need to understand that shift at the micro level. But at the, okay, if you can see, at the so-called the meso level and the macro level of the institution, you could actually see quite a shift as well. If you do remember, right, if back then in March 2023, after ChatGPT became quite widely used, not just in the Philippines, all over Southeast Asia as well. I think you see a lot of universities banning the use of ChatGPT, right? Even top universities in the US, in France, right? Okay, not because they do not believe in it, right? But because they do not know what to do, right? Because they know that if assessment and examination are going to stay the way it is, then it's not going to be really capturing the learning outcomes, right? Because the learning outcomes might be from ChatGPT rather than from the student, him or herself, right? So there is a need to really rethink. And when it starts to rethink, I think you see a lot of governments. I think in Malaysia, they came out with a policy for all higher education. In some of the universities across different cities from Hong Kong right through to Tokyo and Singapore, each university came out with a policy as well, right? Right? Policy for written assessment, policy for even drawing assessment in architecture and all, right? They came out with policy for ethics, right? So a whole range of policies that would be able to guide the use of Gen AI, right? Because I think universities know that if they are going to do what they are doing, then quite likely they are not able to measure learning outcomes in a way that they have traditionally been measuring, right? And therefore, could they be able to actually develop graduates for the labor market that may be relevant to the industry, right? So we actually need to be aware of this transformation, right, at the micro level, right, right through to the meso and macro level as well. Okay, I should point there. Okay, no, it's not. Okay, next slide. I think this is just too far from there, probably. Yeah, right. So I'll just go like next slide. Right. So this would be the key challenges. So the reason why we came up with the competency framework is because we want the PD within our university system to actually come up with professional development that are relevant, that are so-called needs-driven, demand-driven, rather than supply-driven, right? Because we do not want the centers within our university to run PD program that may not be relevant to the university teachers. So we want to be able to go deeply to understand what exactly are those competencies and then develop PD programs, if we are going to be doing that at all, right? To be able to guide PD policies as well as PD workshops or sessions, right? So as I said, these are the three key like challenges that shift like pedagogically, that learning-driven like dynamic, and that systemic transformation of academic ecosystem. I think when you take a look at universities, it is quite different from the school in a way because universities deep dive into a discipline, right, into a profession, right? So it's good that the center director got the same background as me, which is in economics, right? So when I was like developing an economic software about 30 years ago, 1997, when I was a senior high school economics teacher, right out from my my economics undergraduate like degree. So so when we look at the economics, there's a lot of about deductive thinking. So what exactly is deductive thinking in economics, inductive thinking in economics, as well as making that relevance to the real world? So when you look at every discipline, may it be economics, may it be sociology, may it be engineering, there's always a specific way of thinking, right? So we always say that, especially when you start teaching economics in university, you want all graduates to be able to think like an economist, to be able to question, raise question like an economist, right? Right. It's not just about like understanding the concepts in economics, right? To understand the basic principle of human wants are unlimited, right? But the thing is, resources are limited and therefore scarcity, right? That is one of the basic concepts, right? And the other basic concept is ceteris paribus. All other things are constant, right? Right. So we do not want them to just know such things. Like we want them to be actually raising questions about economics that they observe on a day-to-day basis, which is actually what Gen AI is very good at, right? You ask them questions, but you are actually forced to carry out an inquiry with the Gen AI. So, like for us, we were actually like quite excited at that point. Say, hey, it's like now as university lecturers, I could actually support my students to think like an economist, to think like a chemist, to think like a physicist, to think like a mathematician, right? Because students, even at undergraduate, especially the first few years, they are not forced to ask questions. They are only forced to give the correct answer, right? Which is back to high school and senior high school, that one correct answer syndrome, right? But Gen AI is all about questioning, right? Once you do not know how to question, right, then Gen AI is of not much use to you per se, right? So that we thought is quite a potential. But could university teachers support students to do that, right? That is that big question, right? Okay, so we started to look at many of the existing frameworks, right? Say, can we actually try to do or can we try to use one of the existing frameworks to do what we want to do, right? So this is probably one of the most common one for those that are studying education technology. They call that the TPEC, right? The TPEC, technological, pedagogical, content, knowledge, etc., right? And the TPEC have been around, I think, for the last 2 decades or so, or maybe 2.5 decades, right? And then once when Gen AI came out, they just make everything intelligent, right? Intelligent TK, intelligent TCK, right? So I mean, it's not right or wrong, but we just thought that by doing so, you are just, means you see Gen AI as so-called a latch-on, right? Rather than being embedded in the practice, right? So we thought, okay, the TPAC is cool, very scholarly, right? But we also know that TPAC is usually used among scholars rather than teachers, per se, right? And it does not really think through that scaffolding, right? Because when you look at Gen AI use, I think a lot of scaffolding is really needed. Okay, like the next one is actually quite practical. This is a DigCom education framework, and it is done by, I think, the European Commission or the Office of the European Union, right? And it is actually a very practitioner-oriented type of the framework, right? But again, because it was done way before Gen AI, right? So we reckon that if we look at something like this, because when you look at even assessment, I think the way you do assessment with Gen AI is so different from the way you use assessment without Gen AI. So we thought we must really revisit that, right? Because it really neglects that co-evolution of human agency and autonomous AI systems, right? Because you have got to know that a traditional AI system, we always say that a traditional AI system, it personalizes learning, true, to a certain extent, right? But a traditional AI system, it is the learners, it is not the learners that actually plan their own learning path. Because the learning path is actually planned by the AI. Means the AI is the one that prescribes to you. So a traditional AI type of learning system is very prescriptive, right? Because the system would prescribe that, okay, you have gotten these questions wrong, and therefore you should be taking this or that path. But the learning path is prescribed by the system, which means if you're actually talking about learner autonomy and learner empowerment, right? In a way, a traditional AI system takes away that autonomy, in a way, right? Because we want our students, especially in this complex world, to be able to learn for life. We want them to be lifelong learners. We want them to be able to learn how to learn, right? But to be able to learn how to learn, they must be the one that monitor and manage their own learning, which means that they must be the one that chart their own learning paths, right? But a traditional AI system still cannot do that. It would prescribe, right? But it is still personalized learning, but it's a prescribed personalized learning. Okay, next slide. Next slide, please, thank you. Right, this is probably another one which is less commonly used, but it was also done quite a long time back. It was actually used quite a bit for a lot of the professional development, especially in the West, right? Whereby they try to be looking at the digital technologies in such a way of what digital technologies can do, right? So they are taking the viewpoint of the affordances of technologies and how those affordances of technologies could be applied to the education context, right? So if you actually take a look at the first column on your left, right, you could be able to see that those are the functions that digital technologies could do, right? And because those are the functions that digital technologies could do, then those are the type of learning, right, that students can be engaged in the classroom. And therefore, if we want the teachers to have the competencies. We need them to be aware of what the technologies could do and how the technologies could be used in the different types of teaching and learning activities in the classroom or in the school. So, means it is not a bad competency framework, right? It's just that the Gen AI component is not in it, but it's also a way of thinking about how PD could eventually be done. Yeah? Okay, the next slide. Okay, this is the one that I think we in this world are the most familiar with, right? Because I think like UNESCO have been publicizing this quite a lot, right? Since the ICT competency framework for teachers back in 2009, right? And then after that, based on the same idea and the progression, they actually try to come up with a competency framework for teachers, right? And a competency framework for students as well, right? But the thing is, what we thought is because UNESCO's main mandate is really about advocacy with policymakers, right? So they may not come down that much to the practitioner level, right? So there's a lot of, means the thinking might not be deep diving into what teachers and students are really doing in the classroom, right? Right, because I think due to the mandate of the organization, I think it's a lot about policy advocacy, right? The need for such a competencies, right? Of course, if you take a look at this as well, there is not much focus on the student AI dynamics. A lot of the focus is on the teachers, yeah? Right, and of course, some of the operational gaps, the gap between policies as well as actionable practices. So that is how, okay, next slide, please. Yeah, so that's how, based on the landscape review that we have done, we said we must come up with a Gen AI competency framework that does not seek to replace, right, but seek to, as what the director said, seek to actually try to create conversations, right? So it could be remodeling some of the existing frameworks that are out there, right? It could be using our framework to complement other existing framework, right? We do not seek to rule the world, right? So just by being able to create conversations like this, I'm very, very blessed that I've got such an opportunity, right? Because next week I'll be doing it in Shanghai, with my team as well, right? Okay, so I think we need to understand some of the key ideas which I've been trying to repeat myself again and again. I actually realized that since I became a dad more than 20 years ago, okay, no, not 20, about 16, 17 years ago, I tend to repeat myself a lot. Please put your phone on my table, it's bedtime. And I would repeat it 10 times every night because I've got 2 daughters, right? 2 daughters and a wife, yeah. So I would always, because they're all teenagers, so I must tell them to leave the phone on my table before they go to bed. If not, they'll just keep on using. So I'll just repeat myself again and again. So when I actually give talks sometimes, I have that mindset of repeating myself again, but bear with me, right? So just to reinforce that the use of Gen AI is student-driven, right? It's not teacher prescribed. It's very unlikely that teacher would prescribe, right? Okay, so we need to come to terms with that, right? So what we as teachers could do is we are just creating the environment that they could use Gen AI effectively for their learning. So how could we be doing that in our assessment? How could we do that in our learning tasks, right? So being able to learn how to design learning tasks that is able to support the students' Gen AI use is very important. How do we create assessment tasks whereby students are expected to use Gen AI in an inquiry way so that they could think more like a scientist, think more like an economist, just for example, right? So, which means that like we are still interested in the teacher's own Gen AI competencies because the teacher will still need to know how to use Gen AI to be more productive, right? That is like without a shadow of a doubt. But besides that, we want the teachers to be able to support students in the use of the Gen AI within that particular course or within that particular program. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is what we came out with, right? So we have got 4 different dimensions, right? And within each dimension, there would always be teachers' own literacy and empowering students' literacy, right? So it's actually, because you have got to keep in mind that when students use Gen AI, one is not about students learning how to use Gen AI, right? 2 is not students learning, it's not students learning with Gen AI, right? It's actually students learning how to learn with Gen AI, right? So which makes it very, very attractive to us as university educators especially, right? Because if you look at Sustainable Development Goal, SDG 4, right? SDG 4 is about inclusive and equitable quality education and opportunities for lifelong learning until 2030. But what we would expect is that if we look at the complexities of our world now, right, it's not just about opportunities that we should be giving our students, but how do we actually develop lifelong learning? That is the challenge, right? So we would expect that the SDG, the next SDG, if they still call it SDG, would focus a lot on that lifelong development, right? Not just within the education sector, but across sectors as well. So education and training, yeah? Right, so, and at the vertical axis, we have got 3 levels: basic, intermediate, and advanced. And this basic, intermediate, and advanced is about how the teachers and students are using it, right? From basic automation, like how to use Gen AI to create a presentation, right? To more advanced one, whereby it is more of a collaboration, right? So, so it's still at 3 different levels, but we call that basic, intermediate, advanced, which is from basic automation to creative partnership. Okay, the next slide, please. Right. So what you will be able to see is that in each dimension, we have got the teacher's own literacy and empowering students' literacy, right? So, so first dimension is a lot about Gen AI literacy. Second dimension is a lot about curriculum and learning design, as in how do you actually design the curriculum with the assessment in such a way, right, that is able to empower students to co-design meaningfully, right, and be more self-directed in that learning experiences. So this framework is still probably in the draft form. We have not done our consultation yet, except between the 2 like universities. So, you know, it's like we really welcome your feedback with respect to this. Okay, the next slide, please. Right. So here you could see about teaching and learning and assessment as well. So again, you could see that there's teachers' own usage, right, and empowering students like usage. So we were very specific about what the teachers should be able to use Gen AI for their own teaching. But more importantly, we are also very interested in how teachers are able to support students in the Gen AI use, right? Right. And the thing is, what we always hope to be able to do is that by coming out with this framework, we want to be ensure that Gen AI used by students is more inclusive, right? Which means that we do not want just the university teachers from the top universities in the country to have their competencies. We want all teachers to have their competencies. Okay, the next slide, please. Right. Okay, so this is our plan, right? So we come up with the framework. We are collecting case studies now, right? And eventually, we are going to come up with a self-assessment tool where a teacher could assess themselves where they are in terms of their Gen AI competencies. Because it is only when teachers know where their gaps are that the professional learning would take place. So we want to build a Gen AI professional development app, right? That teachers can then be pointed to resources based on the gaps that they have identified themselves, right? So which means that the path of each teacher would be quite different based on the self-assessment tool that they have gone through, right? Based on the self-assessment questionnaire that they have gone through, right, in the phase 2 itself. Right, so this is the plan that we have, and we hope that by the beginning of next year, our framework would have gone through consultation, and we will be able to publish that, right, and launch it with UNESCO. We hope that that framework would come with case studies that would be able to show case studies across different disciplines. Right, and we hope that by the end of 2026 that we would be able to develop that PDF that is Gen AI enabled. Right, so next slide, please. I think I am. Right, so this is what we are doing. We are working very closely with UNESCO IG, right, the International Center for Higher Education Innovations in doing that consultation. And we hope that we could be launching the framework with them together with the tool and the case study, right? The next slide, please. Right, so this is a project that is done like within my team in the Global Institute for Emerging Technologies. You could contact us, you could go to our LinkedIn, right? And I am open for questions, feedback, discussion. Thank you.